We're on chapter 72, the mountain rumble. Rico, too, stood at the mouth of the cave. Wait a minute, the mouth of the cave? Who lives in the cave? Is this going to be the part where we finally see that Thistle and Thorn, are those the bears' names? We have to go back and look. Who lives in the cave? Rosam, Unit 7134, are you in there? Are you in here? Sorry. The only response was his own flat voice echoing back. But he sensed movement somewhere down the tunnel, so he switched on his headlights, raised his rifle, and marched inside. The Rico marched past animal bones and rock piles and wide cracks in the walls. His blocky, now that sounds a lot like um, the the mountain woman that's in the Snow White. Remember how she has all those bones around her cave? But we know that she's not in this story. We know who lives in this cave. Okay, his blocky head swiveled from side to side, scanning for any sign of Roz, but she was nowhere to be found. So he turned and marched back toward daylight. And then a deafening roar filled the cave. From the shadows flew a giant body. Mother Bear charged into the robot and smashed him against a wall. Then, oh, I'm sorry, I called him Thistle and Thorn, so I'm glad we actually have it. Thank you, Peter Brown. Then Nettle and Thorn jumped in, and together the family went to work. They rammed his legs. They slashed his chest. They muscled him to the ground, and on his way down, Rico too. Oh, I don't want to read this part. On his way down, Rico too squeezed the trigger, and there was a flash of blazing light, and the walls began to crumble. Nettle grabbed her brother by the scruff and pulled him outside as an avalanche of rock thundered behind them. Mother Bear howled. The rifle exploded. Stones clanged against Rico too. The avalanche slowed and settled as a cloud of dust billowed out from the cave. Mother, Nettle peered into the darkness. I'm here, said a weak voice. The young bears dashed inside and found their mother half buried. They pulled heavy stones from her body and dusted her off. I have broken bones, she rasped, but they will heal. Where is the robot? Rico two's headlights switched back on. Oh, that's terrible. You would think that the robot was taken care of, but the headlights switched on. And this just says a lot about how guns do more damage than you think they will. I mean, they already do damage. They're doing a lot of damage. Okay, his body was scraped and scratched and scraped. His head was badly dented. His left arm was completely useless. So, whip, it was tossed aside. Then the one-armed robot limped out of the cave and continued the hunt for Roz. Don't worry about me, Mother Bear growled to Nettle and Thorn. Kill the robot. Now you know which robot they're talking about. With his heavy limp and grinding gears, Rico too was easy to track. The young bears caught up with him as he was entering a grove of pines, but they didn't attack, not yet. There was a better place to finish him off up ahead. So they hung back and followed him across the mountainside. The distant rumble of the waterfall grew louder with each passing minute. Then a slash of white appeared through the trees. Soon the robot was standing beside the roiling, frothing river just above the falls. He was too badly damaged to leap over the falls or to wade through the rapids or to climb down the cliffs. But he had to continue his hunt for the target, so he started limping upriver in search of a safer crossing. There was a rustling, and the young bears exploded out from the trees. They threw their heavy shoulders against the robot's body, and he stumbled sideways onto the riverbank. Nettle reared up and wrestled the robot, twisting and shaking him with all her strength. And Rico, too, felt his feet slipping on the rocks, and he felt his body tipping over, and then he plunged into the white water, and he brought Nettle with him. The current immediately swept Nettle toward the falls. She rolled through the rapids, crashed into one rock, and then desperately clambered onto another. Rico, too, stood straight up. The river rushed around him. He took a step, slipped, and disappeared beneath the water. And then he was up again. Thorn ran to help his sister, but she was pointing upriver and roaring, "Use the logs!" But when the younger bear turned around, he saw what she meant. A jumble of broken logs were wedged between the rocks of the rapids, and a moment later Thorn was on top of them. With water sloshing over his back, he forced a paw between the logs and pried the top one loose, and it splashed into the river and wound its way down through the rapids, only to roll harmlessly past the robot. Then it dropped out of sight. The bear tried again. He popped another log into the river, and this one spun just in time to ram its full weight into the robot's chest. Rico, too, went sailing backwards and sank beneath the surface, and when he reappeared, the river was full of heavy wooden torpedoes. One log pounded the robot's shoulder, and another slammed his face. More logs knocked him closer and closer to the falls. The current became too much for the injured robot, and it carried him away. He grasped for anything solid he could cling to, but the rocks were too slippery, so he settled for a fistful of fur. Whose fur is that? Nettle had been hanging onto one rock this whole time, but now that the robot was pulling her, she started losing her grip. She couldn't hang on much longer. Finally, she cried out, "I'm sorry, Thorn!" And she let go. Nettle and Rico, too, surged toward the rumbling falls. The bear felt the robot release his grip, and she watched him glide over the edge, and then she closed her eyes and waited for the end to come. But it was not Nettle's time. Reader, Peter Brown is talking to you. Reader, what happened next is hard to believe. You see, the river didn't fall away beneath Nettle. It tightened around her. I'm going to start crying. Hold on a second. Hundreds of fish surrounded the bear. They pressed their faces into her fur. They thrashed their tails against the current, and they slowly pushed her away from the edge. Farther and farther they went, gradually moving upriver until Nettle's brother pulled her from the water. The bears collapsed onto the riverbank, and when they looked down, they saw hundreds of fish looking back up. "Thank you," roared Nettle. "I'll never eat fish again." Okay. The fish smiled and sank into the rapids. Now, here's what I want to tell you. Who do you think led those fish? Peter Brown doesn't tell us. I feel like this is the one where we should have said, the fish smiled. It should have said, that it was that pike, right? The one, is it the one that rescued? I mean, the one that that Roz took out of the pond and put into. I feel like that's how it should be. "I thought you were dead," said Thorn, breathing hard. "So did I," Nettle laughed. "Looks like you're stuck with me a while longer, little brother." "I'm not little." It felt good to joke, but the bears quickly turned serious. They were both bruised and bleeding, and their mother was in far worse condition. However, it would all be worthwhile if Rico, too, had finally been killed. The bears crept to the edge of the cliff, and there at the bottom of the waterfall, strewn across the wet rocks, was the shattered body of the dead robot. So that's chapter 72. There's one more robot left.